In a far away and distant land, the city of Whitevale sits in a plentiful valley. Its citizens are quiet and peaceful people, who have been enjoying a peace that has lasted the past 50 years. The war for settlement of the land had long since passed, and the army of Whitevale had ruthlessly taken the victory. The enemy had fled into the woods, vowing a revenge that would level the city and place the land back into the hands of its rightful owner. But today had marked the 50th anniversary of the victory, and no such retaliation had occurred. 30 miles south of the kingdom was a village called Griffin Lake, a little more than 6 buildings on either side of a gravel path. A small inn sat at the end of the town where the gruffest adventurers and criminal riffraff congregated. No one batted an eye when a hooded figure entered the door and ordered a drink. Housed beneath the cloak was a renowned knight and retired member of the king's personal guard, Matthias Ludo. Thanks to his hooded cloak, no one recognized him as he sat down at a table to investigate his shady surroundings. Across from him at the table sat a young elven bard. He twisted his mustache before he spoke. "A little bit far from home, aren't we, Sir Knight?" he said. "I could say the same for you," Matthias replied. "How many miles is it from here to the southern realm?" 400, give or take a few," the bard replied. "But I'm more interested in what someone of your reputation is doing in a place like this. Surely you couldn't have thought that a simple cloak would hide a living legend. You won what? 7, 8 royal tournaments?" 9, Matthias shot back, "and if you must know, I'm here by order of the king. The royalty gets especially nervous around the victory day of the Settlers' War, so they've sent me and many other knights across the kingdom to keep an eye out for any suspicious activity." "Good luck watching all the suspicious activity in this place," the young bard laughed. "You would have to have eyes in the back of your head to do that." Before Matthias spoke again, a rough-looking taller man nudged the bard on the shoulder. "He's ready, Javier. It's time," Matthias heard him whisper. "Until we meet again," the young elf said, before leaving and heading to the corner of the bar. Matthias watched as Javier followed the tall man to a table in the corner of the tavern, where a red-bearded dwarf was already seated. An old and pale man sat down across from them. Matthias decided to pay special attention to their dealings. He watched as the pale man slid a map upon the table and drew specific attention to one tiny area. They conversed for a little while longer before the pale man plopped a large sack of coins on the table and left without another word. The 3 men divided up the money and promptly left the tavern. Curious as to the nature of the deal he had just witnessed, Matthias decided to follow them. Matthias let the 3 adventurers get a slight head start and then began to casually follow them down the road. He kept distance between himself and the 3 men as to not arouse any suspicion. It wasn't until the road took a sharp curve and began to run through a deep wooded area that he lost sight of his targets. He entered the woods and scanned the area. The old trees and thick foliage surrounding the path could conceal anything. The 3 men must have caught wind of him tailing them and scampered off to hide. Suddenly, Matthias heard the sound of someone drawing a sword and drew his in response, as the bald man leaped out of the woods and onto the path. The crashing of their swords rang through the forest as they began their duel. The bald man, to Matthias' surprise, was quite proficient in swordplay, but eventually the fight began to favor Ludo's experience, as he was able to sweep the bald man's leg and disarm him. As the man rolled over, Matthias moved his sword to his throat to begin questioning him. Before he could speak, the other 2 men leaped out of the bushes and yelled, "Wait! Don't kill him!" Matthias recognized the bard from before. "Tell me the nature of the deal you just made, and he's free to go," Matthias remarked. "Don't tell him anything," said the bald man, still lying down. "He's pointing a sword at your throat, Lance," the dwarf said. "Would you really rather die than have him know about the cave?" "What cave?" said Matthias in response. "We were supposed to go to East Marrow Cave and retrieve what is it again?" said the dwarf, confused. "A gauntlet," the young bard said. The small elf threw a piece of parchment to Matthias. He unfurled it to reveal a detailed drawing of a rather ordinary-looking gauntlet. He pulled his sword away from the bald man's neck. "Your employer paid a very high price for such a tiny item," Matthias said, examining the parchment. "And a lot more is on the way, apparently," the elf said. "The bag was just up front." "And do you know much about your employer?" Matthias asked. "Not much," the dwarf replied. "He calls himself the Black Spider. That's all we can say for sure." "Now, if you'd kindly hand that parchment back," the bald man said, "we would like to be on our way." "Oh, you can leave," Matthias said. "I'm just coming with you." "What?" the bald man replied. "It's common knowledge to most of the locals that a terrible and starved beast lives in the East Marrow Cave," Matthias said, "and you 3 look so ill-equipped to survive it." "We're not looking for any help," the bald man replied. Whatever it is in that cave, it's nothing we can't handle. It's not you that I'm worried about, Matthias replied. It's your accomplices. You're traveling with a bard and, Well, I'm a chairmaker by trade, the dwarf replied. But back in the day I was a fearsome soldier. The bandits didn't come to my kin's mine out of fear of running into me. And how long ago was that exactly, Matthias asked. 60 years or so, the dwarf said. But we dwarves age well, and I'm just as spry as I was then. You mean you wish you were as spry as you were back then, the elf said. Lance, perhaps this man has a point. He is the legendary Sir Lido, after all. A little extra help couldn't hurt. Fine, the bald man agreed, but you aren't getting paid. Of course, Matthias said smugly, and I'm still in charge, Lance said. I wouldn't have it any other way. Matthias laughed. They continued walking down the path. After some time, Matthias began to speak to the elf. I never did catch your name, Matthias said. The name is Javier Valentin, the elf replied, but some like to call me the songbird of the southern realm. He likes to call himself that, the dwarf said. Yes, but it is beginning to catch on, Javier replied. One day, I will be the most famous lutist in all the land. That is, if I ever get hired to play my lute in front of a crowd. And who are you? Matthias asked the dwarf. The name's Quincy Redbeard, the dwarf replied, future owner of the Redbeard Wicker Chair Emporium. That is, once I get the money from this deal. He's a crazy man, Javier said. He insists on making wicker chairs when wicker has been on the way out for years. This is what I keep telling him. Nobody can resist the comfort of a good wicker chair, Redbeard replied, and pair that with my craftsmanship, wicker will be back on the rise. And you? The bald man said nothing. I'll give you a hint as to him, Javier said. We call ourselves the All Too Merry Companions. He's the one who makes that name a little ironic. So I take it his plans for the money aren't necessarily ones of self-improvement like you two, Matthias said. It's more down the alley of paying off the bounty on his head, Javier laughed. What did he do? Matthias asked. I did what was necessary to survive. People always see Whitevale as the glowing gem of the kingdom, Lance replied. But when you're born poor, that's all you'll ever be to the people above you. I just got tired of being below them, that's all. It's a bit of a touchy subject, Javier said quietly. The men stayed by a river overnight, and early in the morning set out in search for a shop to arm themselves against the beast. After about half a day's walk from their camp by the river, Matthias and the All Too Merry companions happened upon a small shop on the side of the road. Javier eagerly ran inside to see what his new gold could buy him, and the other men reluctantly followed him. As they walked through the door, they saw the shop seem much larger on the inside than on the outside. The shop was crowded with oddities and items untidily strewn across the floor and shelves alike. A tiny man slid out from behind the shelves. Welcome to Morton's Shacks of Commodities and Curiosities, he said. I am Morton. How may I be of service to you, gentlemen? We need weapons, Lance replied gruffly. Of course, Morton replied, but someone can only get so far with weapons alone. May I interest you in any potions, elixirs, cloaks, spellbooks, cursed items, enchanted? Just weapons will be fine, Matthias said, cutting him off. Morton slid a shelf behind him aside to reveal a plethora of highly ornamented swords, axes, and daggers. All of them glistened as if they'd been freshly polished, and some glowed with the slight hum of an enchantment. I have a high selection of high-quality items with proportionately high prices, Morton said. But for adventurers like you, a high price is a small cost for proper protection. Redbeard, who was a bit distracted, spoke up. I noticed you have a lot of wicker chairs, stocking up with the new trend, I see. Actually, people have been exchanging those for iron chairs, Morton replied. Iron is the new trend. Oh dear, Redbeard said, concerned. Now, back to you, gentlemen, Morton said. Do any of these pop out at you? We're not quite looking for weapons of any magical caliber. Half of my companions barely could hold them correctly, much less utilize any powerful magic, said Matthias. Just simple, well-forged swords should get the job done. Are you sure? Morton asked. Even though the swords are expensive, they might keep you from becoming a one-time customer, if you know what I mean. How about you show us your other stock, or we won't be customers at all, Lance said. Of course, Morton replied. I have a wide selection of, well-worn items as well. Morton opened up a trap door in the floor and lifted a large leather bag onto the counter. The swords inside clattered loudly as he set it down. "I can offer any weapon you find in there for a fair price," Morton said. "Just don't reach in there too quick, or you may come out empty-handed." Lance and Redbeard each drew swords out of the bag and paid with some of the gold their employer had given him. Javier, however, had already purchased an item and couldn't afford even the dullest of swords. "It's a lute," the elf said proudly. "A lute enchanted to make the player learn to play the lute within a week." "You already know how to play the lute," said Redbeard, annoyed. "Yes," Javier replied, "but there is always room for improvement." "When did you buy that?" Lance said, equally annoyed. "We were talking to the shopkeep the whole time." "No, I was talking to the shopkeep," Javier said. "He was back there this whole time." They looked to the back corner of the shop to see yet another Morton standing behind yet another counter. "Hello," the other Morton said. "Welcome to Morton's Shacks of Commodities and Curiosities. I am Morton. How may I be of service to you gentlemen?" "You know you're going to have to return that," Lance said. "We have a no-return policy on enchanted items," Morton remarked. "Of course you do," Lance said gruffly. Using what little remaining gold he had, Javier was able to purchase a small dagger. They left Morton's shop and returned to the road. They followed the map for another evening before making camp in a dense forest. The map showed that they were only less than a half-day's walk from the cave that housed the gauntlet. They began to walk at dawn, although the day seemed to get darker and darker as the forest grew more and more dense around them. Javier twirled his dagger around in his hand as he walked through the dwindling sunlight. "I know it's not a sword, but a dagger is a definite second choice," Javier laughed. "Especially at that price. It would be like losing money not to buy it, am I right?" "Aye, it was a good price," Redbeard agreed. "But a sword is far from the best choice weapon-wise. A nice sturdy axe gets the job done quick and strikes twice the fear in the heart of your enemies. This is like swinging around a toothpick." "Those are strong words from a chairmaker," Matthias laughed. "I saw my fair share of action back in the day," Redbeard said. "I was as strong as an ox back then, defended our mines from bandits more times than I can count." "And so naturally you took your skills on the battlefield and applied them into making chairs," Javier said jokingly. "When a man finds his calling, then and only then is he truly happy," Redbeard said, smiling. "With the gold from this little venture, I'll have resources enough to build hundreds, nay, thousands of chairs, and everyone's favorite chair will be a Redbeard-made chair next to their hearth." "Or, maybe," Javier said, "you'll just be the man with 1,000 chairs." "Everyone be quiet. We're here," Lance said. They had reached the entrance of the cave marked on their map. Inside the cave was dark as night, and the audible snoring of the beast sleeping inside could be distinctly heard. Lance was the first one to move. "Come on, all of you," he said. "I'm not about to turn tail and run just because something big in there is taking a nap." "Oh, I don't mind that it's sleeping," Redbeard said. "It's the waking him up that I'm the most afraid of." "Whatever is in there, it can't be too big," Lance said. "This map shows that this cave is tiny. If something can fit in there, it's nothing that 4 men, one of which is the legendary Sir Ludo, can't handle." They all ducked their heads and traveled inside the cave, using the walls of the cavern to guide them through the pitch darkness. A little more than 200 feet in, a light became visible far down the passageway. The light was coming from torches that lined the walls of a large chamber. In the middle of the chamber sat the beast, surrounded by what seemed to be a sea of bones. The beast was terrible. Its skin was riddled with scars from foes long since consumed, and its drooling mouth lay open to reveal not 1 but 3 rows of razor-sharp teeth. "I thought you said this was a small cave," Javier asked. "That thing is gigantic." "Quiet," Matthias said. "We don't want to wake it before we have a plan." "We outnumber it," Lance remarked. "Certainly the 4 of us can take it down." "From the looks of it, many have also thought that, and fallen," Matthias replied. "But if the original owner of the gauntlet had ever intended to get it back, he must have known a sure way to get around this beast." "Perhaps I could be of assistance," Javier said. "The songbird of the southern realm could lull the beast to sleep with a soothing melody, as the rest of you slip by undetected." "Are you sure it will work?" Redbeard asked. "If it does not, I will die an elf trying to kill a large beast with a tiny knife," Javier said bravely. "It will never work," Lance replied. "Well, does anyone have any better ideas?" Javier shrugged. They all reluctantly agreed that a musical distraction was the best option to cover the sounds of them moving past the beast. Javier played the calmest and most soothing melody he knew, on the newest lute he had purchased from Morton. Redbeard went first, as the other two had suspected if anyone were to be the loudest getting across the room, it would be the dwarf in heavy armor. Lance and Matthias got through with ease, as the spell that Javier was playing over the beast seemed to keep the beast happily snoring away. But just as Javier was about to back through the door, one of the strings on his lute broke, letting out a twang that echoed throughout the whole cave.
"Oh," the elf said in disbelief, "so this thing is a piece of garbage." Within a moment the beast was awake and barreling at Javier. He closed his eyes in anticipation of being the beast's next meal, but to his surprise, when he opened his eyes, he was not met with the bright lights of the afterlife, but Lance and Redbeard swinging their swords as hard as they can, backing the beast down. The tides turned yet again, as with one sweep of its arm, the beast was able to break both of their blades. The blow hit with enough force to knock both men to the ground. The beast, now looming over them, stepped forward with malcontent in its eyes. Suddenly a flash of fire pierced the darkness as Matthias swung one of the torches at the beast's head. It retreated to the far side of the room, away from the source of the fire. The four adventurers dashed through the room to the much thinner cavern the beast certainly could not fit through. "How did you know that was going to work?" Lance asked Matthias. "I didn't," Matthias replied. They traveled further into the cavern. The path descended deeper and deeper underground. "Never have I been more disappointed in an investment," Javier said, looking at his broken lute. "I spend so much money on it, and it repays me by almost killing me." "Maybe you could spend a little less time disappointed in your lute," Redbeard said, "and more time thankful for the friends who made sure it didn't kill you." "I suppose I could," Javier said, "but then I would have to stop feeling sorry for myself. So I've elected to continue to be disappointed." As he finished his sentence, they walked into a room flooded with gold coins. "On second thought," the elf said, "I've moved on." They began to walk knee-deep through the gold towards the door at the other end of the room. Redbeard reached down for a handful of gold, but Matthias stopped him before his hand reached it. He pointed to a sign above the door. Redbeard read it aloud. "To make it through this door, all must be accounted for." "Ah, so it's a test of greed. If you take any of the gold, we'll be dead or trapped for sure. Clever." "Clever, yes," Javier said. "Fiscally responsible? No. Who puts all their money into a death trap for anyone who wants to take money out?" "Someone who's hiding something worth more than all of this," Lance replied. "That black spider better pay pretty well," Javier responded. "If it weren't for that beast, I would grab as much of this as I could and start a new life somewhere much more temperate." As they moved closer to the door, the gold became more and more enticing. It seemed to shimmer more, and its polish became more and more mirror-like. One could almost see a richer version of themselves holding items they could purchase with the gold in the reflection. Even the noble Matthias Ludo had difficulty passing up on the shiny coins at his feet. But suddenly, as soon as he touched the door frame, the effect wore off. He once again was able to see the value of his own life compared to the value of the cursed gold. "Do not touch it," he said. "It's enchanted to make you think you want to steal it. It's a trap." Lance and Redbeard listened to the knight's words, and for a moment it appeared as if Javier did too. But when Lance and Redbeard made it to the door, Javier froze, his pupils filled with yellow as he stooped down and grabbed an armful of coins. The entire room began to shake violently. Acting fast, Matthias pulled Javier through the door, just as the floor beneath him opened up, and all of the gold fell into a deep, dark pit. As Javier fell through the safety of the door, the gold he had stolen fell from his pocket and dissolved into a thin smoke. "You fool," Matthias said angrily. "You could have died." "I would have died the richest man in the world," Javier said, smiling. "Let's hope for all of our sakes there's another way out," Lance said grimly. As they walked further, it became more evident they were nearing the end of the cave. At the end of the tunnel, they could see the faint white glow of daylight as the pathway opened up into the largest room yet. In the center of the room, the pedestal sat, highlighted as if by a spotlight by a large hole in the dome-like ceiling of the room. The pedestal itself was at the center of a tiny island surrounded by a shallow moat. After he looked closer, Matthias saw a rope hanging through the center of the hole in the ceiling and a bucket hanging a few inches above the water. "It's a well," he said, "or at some point it was at least." "Looks like that's our way out of here," Lance said. They waded through the shallow water to the slightly raised island in the middle. Lance stepped forward to grab the gauntlet, but once again Matthias sensed something. "Look, those tiles surrounding the pedestal. They look like pressure plates," Matthias said. "Someone throw something on top of them." Redbeard quickly grabbed Javier's loot with the broken string and threw it next to the pedestal. The tile it landed on lowered slightly, and a few moments later a ring of fire erupted around the gauntlet, surely meant to burn anybody alive wishing to steal it. Javier looked at Redbeard infuriated.
"You said it yourself, it was a piece of garbage," said Redbeard, shrugging. Matthias drew his sword and extended it underneath the gauntlet. He flicked the far end of the sword up and caught it with his other hand. He immediately began inspecting the glove. "Give that to me," said Lance urgently. Matthias did not listen. He removed his own glove and put the gauntlet on his hand. He waited. Nothing happened. "Something's not right," Matthias said. "Why would someone go through all the trouble of hiding this?" They all began to climb up the rope leading out of the tunnel. Redbeard elected to go first, and being a dwarf, he took the longest to reach the top. Matthias went last, and to his surprise, when he reached the top, his companions were already speaking to someone. As he stepped over the side wall, Lance was already handing the gauntlet over to the Black Spider. 3 wagons of gold with horses attached sat waiting for the all-too-merry companions. Upon seeing Matthias, the Black Spider said, "How odd to see a legendary knight traveling with such equally odd company. Sorry, I did not know you had interest in this venture, so you'll understand that I did not bring the funds to pay 4 of you. You'll have to live with the payment of the service you have performed for the kingdom." And with that, he entered a horse-drawn carriage and left without another word. Matthias had a very bad feeling about what had just transpired. "If someone were to take me back to Morton's with great haste, I would be very thankful," Matthias said. "Well," Javier replied, "seeing as I have just become a very rich man, naturally my first move will be to spend an enormous amount of money. I will take you there." Matthias jumped on Javier's wagon, and all 4 adventurers rode to the shop. Upon arrival, Matthias rushed into the shop and pulled out the drawing of the gauntlet. "Hello again, gentlemen," Morton said behind the counter. "You've survived your quest. How may I serve you yet again?" "What do you know about this particular gauntlet?" Matthias asked hurriedly. Morton examined the drawing for a moment. "Ah, the Gauntlet of Consuming Fire," Morton replied. "It's a very ancient relic indeed. One must simply wear the gauntlet and set themselves ablaze, and they will be able to take the form of fire incarnate. It was a very powerful weapon before it was lost." "So the pressure plates were not a trap at all," Matthias said to himself. "Just a spark to power the gauntlet." "Are you saying you have the gauntlet with you?" Morton asked. "Because if so, I am willing to trade my entire stock for it, make both of us very rich men." "No, my accomplices have already traded it away to their employer," Matthias replied. "What do you know about the Black Spider?" "He is a very dangerous man indeed," Morton replied. "If the gauntlet were to somehow fall into his hands, it would definitely not be in the interest of the king." "And why is that?" Matthias asked. "The Black Spider hates the king," Morton replied. "He was a general during the Battle of Settlement, and not on the side most would consider to be the good one. If he has the gauntlet, I have one guess where he's going to use it." Matthias turned around to see his former followers had been listening in on his conversation. Javier had a huge stack of items he was planning to purchase with his newfound riches. "We've been tricked," Matthias said. "The Black Spider used us in his plot to destroy Whitevale. We have to go stop him." "I'm not about to go die right after making the largest profit I've ever had in my life," Lance replied. "If you think I care enough for that city that spat on me, then you're a crazy man." "For the last 8 hours, I've had 2 near-death experiences," Javier added. "I'm not about to go throw myself into another one just for nobility's sake. You've got to be alive to spend gold." "I'm afraid I have to agree with these 2, said Redbeard. "I've waited my whole life for this opportunity, and I'm not about to go throw it away." Matthias waited for a moment for them to change their minds, but they all remained silent. He angrily turned and threw his entire coin purse onto the counter. "I'll need a horse," he said. "Hopefully that will cover it." "That's enough for anyone in the stable," Morton replied. "Take whichever one is to your liking." Matthias chose the fastest horse he could find and rode for Whitevale. When he had arrived at the city, the attack had already begun. The Black Spider was now floating 50 feet in the air, spewing fire out of his hands upon the towers of the city. The city's archers fired volley after volley of arrows, but they all quickly turned to ash before reaching the fiery figure. Suddenly, a large stone flew in the air as one of the city's catapults landed a hit on the Black Spider. The Black Spider fell and hit the ground hard, but much to Matthias's surprise, picked himself up very quickly. The city gates opened, and the kingdom's cavalry came spilling out, running at the Black Spider. They were met with a deadly blaze, but more and more spilled out, hoping to break through the Black Spider's attack. Matthias decided this was his time to catch the Black Spider unaware, and quickly rode to flank him. As he approached, the cavalry wore thin, and the Black Spider quickly turned around. Matthias had to dive off of his horse to dodge the incoming flame, and on the upwards of his roll to recover his footing threw his sword at the black spider's head. It turned bright orange and melted before it reached him. Now weaponless, Matthias could only watch as the black spider raised his hands to engulf him in a terrible flame. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Lance jumped in front of Matthias, shielding him from the blaze with a magical shield. "You're lucky," Lance said. "Some of your heroism must have rubbed off on us, old man." "You came back," said Matthias, surprised. "Yes," answered Redbeard, "and this time I brought an axe." "Morton was pretty happy to sell us a large portion of his enchanted stock," Javier said, smiling. The reunion was cut short when the black spider rose up into the air and focused his power into a fireball that would level the city if he threw it. He kept building the fireball larger and larger with the gauntlet raised to the sky. Javier brought out the most powerful weapon they had at their disposal. He pulled out a large black book and opened it to the middle page. Suddenly a vortex of dark clouds swirled into existence above all of their heads, and the rumble of thunder could be heard. A single bolt of lightning shot downward through the gauntlet and the black spider and onto the ground. The black spider screamed, and then he and the fireball exploded into a blinding disk of fire and smoke. The sky cleared and the fires died down. "I honestly wasn't expecting you to come back," Matthias said. "We figured we couldn't have gotten the gauntlet anyway without your help," Redbeard replied, "and that you had saved all of our lives at least once in that cave." "Plus, we figured the only man richer than the black spider is the king," Javier said. "We probably have a hefty reward headed our way." And they did in fact receive a large reward. For saving the kingdom, Matthias was given his own tower within the castle. The bounty on Lance's head was dropped. Javier became a part of the royal entertainment and had a very successful bar within the city. And Redbeard was able to build a new shop in the town for which to sell his wicker chairs